Hey guys, your grumpy sound guy here, J.R. Everhart from CLP Audio. So today we're going to basically just have a conversation, and this is going to be way less technical information and more of the politics of what it is to be part of church production. I've been in and out of church production most of my adult life. I'm a Christian. CLP Audio is a Christian operated company. We do our very best to operate with Christian standards and integrity and that sort of thing. Business is business, and sometimes it gets messy. So that just kind of is what it is. And sometimes the clients don't understand when you got to make price increases and people got to kind of find another production company to work with because you're just growing beyond where they are. So, I mean, that is what it is. That's really the only thing that kind of jerks me sideways sometimes about, being in business. It's just tough. And then the Bible says, to be fervent in business, and you got to do what's best for your company. But today we're going to do, that's a whole nother conversation. But today it's really just about church production. And I want to approach this from a couple different angles. I'm going to try my very best, my absolute very best, to be a good Christian and stay positive about this. But the truth of the matter is working in church production is messy. It's absolutely messy. Really just being part of a church and getting involved and, even if it's on a volunteer basis or something like that, is messy. Churches are messy. I always say that the only difference between your local sports pub and a church is they serve alcohol at the sports pub. And obviously their focus is on making money, and church's focus should be on Christ. But that's not always the case, is it, ladies and gentlemen? So let me, just start on the absolute most positive side of this. So, and then we'll get into some horror stories later in the video. Hang out. This is going to be, I'm trying to condense this down into about, 15 or 30 minute, conversation, but there's a lot to be said with this. First of all, I spent a solid, 12 or 15 years inside of Christian production, church production kind of stuff, almost exclusively. I came off the road in '94 and decided to start going to church and get, recommitted my life to the Lord and all that sort of stuff, and walked away from all the secular stuff that I had been around. I really needed to make a break. There was some personal issues going on in my life that I needed to really make that clean break and to kind of get myself established in the faith and that sort of thing. So that started a 15-year, span working inside a church. My kids were young. I wanted to be close to them. I wanted to be able to bring them to work. I wanted to be able to, have them in a positive environment to the best of my ability. So that's kind of why, I went in that direction. It was best for me. It's what was best for my family. And I was very blessed doing church production. There was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But church kind of made it hard, and that's really the problem with a lot of this stuff, is that church makes things way more difficult than what they need to be, specifically when you have people in control who really have no idea what they're doing technically. And that is many times the norm inside of church production. The churches that relinquish control to the people God sends to them that really know what they're doing technically, are typically the churches that grow exponentially and really bring a lot of stuff to the table that benefits the ministry all the way around. A good tech director can be as important as your music pastor. And I know one pastor particularly, because I'm friends with a bunch of pastors even still to this day, who would say that the sound guy was the second most important guy in every service. Because if the production's not good, well, then the service never communicates what it's trying to communicate. You know, people are distracted with feedback issues or just gear that doesn't want to work correctly, or if the live feed is jacked up or audio to video is jacked up, you know, things like that. Those things, you're just kind of shooting yourself in the foot, especially in today's age where everyone has a short attention span. And, you know, if you don't hit them between the eyes right out of the gate, then you're typically tuning you out and tuning into somebody else. You know, so a good tech director that you can trust can really make all that stuff work a whole lot better, you know. And it's important. It's super huge important, you know, that you have somebody in place that, number one, has the skill set that you need, has a documented, you know, track record of success, can bring hardcore, you know, references to the table that can attest to their skill level. And, you know, that usually guys like that, guys like me, usually don't come cheap, you know. It just is the way it is. It's like everything else in production. It's expensive. Everything in production is expensive, and the right people are expensive. So if you start with, let's start with like the small church, maybe even a mobile church, you know, kind of framework, and start there, and we'll work our way up to, you know, big super church kind of mentality and stuff like that. So most of the small mobile churches, or a church that just got into their first building, those guys are usually they're usually really tight financially. You know, a lot of those kind of churches don't really even have a paid pastor in place. You know, a lot of those churches, the pastor is still part-time. You know, he's still working a day gig and doing this on the weekends, or, you know, whatever. Or he's being supported by another ministry that helps plant churches. You know, that sort of thing, because I've been through all that as well. I used to put together mobile sound systems for churches all the time, you know, that were doing the whole have church in your local school, or, you know, something like that. I really, really probably spent, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, you know, doing that sort of thing for a church that was all about planting churches. So I have a lot of experience inside of that. I've been on staff. I've done all the stuff that needs to be done as a tech director role. And, you know, the small churches just don't have much of a budget. So they'll find someone like an IT guy, or they'll find a DJ that goes to their church, or someone who is willing to, you know, put forth some kind of effort to learning something about, you know, sound and lighting and video and stuff like that. And they just get in there and they get online, they read a bunch of forums, and, you know, they try to network with other, you know, church support sites on Facebook and stuff like that. And there's a ton of that stuff, guys, out there. There's a ton of resources out there. They go to what I call YouTube University and get on YouTube and learn how to use the equipment. Teaching people how to use the equipment is never the hard part. You know, it can be intimidating at first for people who's never done it before, but once they get their hands dirty or their feet wet, you know, in mixing, it's not rocket science. It really isn't. The rocket science is having the ear and the understanding of what works best for your programming needs, because that's really the bottom line here is, you know, what is going to work for your programming needs. When I used to have churches approach me about install and stuff like that, and I've done a boatload of that stuff, the conversation I always have with them is, what are your programming needs? You know, because if you build a system dictated by your budget, you're going to spend way more money in the long run. I think Church Production Magazine did a poll, and there was a statistic that came out, this has probably been 20 years ago, that most churches buy 3 systems before they find the one that they really need. They buy one that just to get started, and then they have one that is, you know, somebody in the church or a friend of somebody in the church comes in and does some upgrades, you know, to try and do something, maybe a complete overhaul, you know, but it's kind of a buddy thing on a really tight budget. then 2 or 3 years down the road they realize that system's not meeting their needs, and then finally they call somebody like me or a install company to come in and actually give them what they need to do their ministry. And that's never cheap, so small churches really struggle with that scenario. What I would, if you're a pastor watching this and you're in that small church mentality, what I would recommend most is, if you get people who are willing to volunteer their time to work in tech, then you need to make sure that you're spending money to invest in getting those guys trained correctly. I did that for many years. I went around and teach sound reinforcement workshops to small to medium-sized churches, and basically, taught volunteers how to be better sound guys and lighting guys and video guys, and that is huge. If you're getting these guys for free, the least you can do is invest in their training. Excuse me. Send them out to conferences, and stuff like that. Send them out to, send them to Texas or out in the Midwest somewhere where the big super churches do conferences all the time, and let them really get on fire, for doing tech. That way, the money you'll spend there will, you'll reap benefits from that for years and years and years. That really makes people feel like, they matter. And the mistake that I see in, from like large churches to small churches, not mega churches, but large churches to small churches, is they just work people to death, and they don't see their ministry through their tech people's eyes. I cannot begin to tell you how many times I have went into a church environment to do a workshop, and then those guys be at war, the tech team be at war with the praise and worship team. That's a real thing, man. That happens every day. And usually the first thing I would have to do, I would come in and do all the troubleshooting and tech stuff first on like Friday, and then Saturday would be an all-day, workshop where we're going to meet with the praise team and the tech team, and I'm going to stand there and pretty much kind of put everybody in their place. Because if it's a volunteer staff that's running tech and the praise team is mad at the staff because they're not giving them what they need on stage, well, that is very, very unfair to those volunteers. If the church hasn't taken the time to invest in their skill set, it is not right for the praise team to be so hard on the tech team. Because you got to understand, if you're playing in the praise team, you spent probably decades of your life honing your craft as a musician and as a singer or a songwriter or that kind of stuff, and then you got a tech team that the church is doing nothing to support outside of just giving them a bunch of gear, and those guys have no training. Some of them guys haven't been running sound for 6 months. I've seen that. And the tech team is just constantly frustrated. The praise and worship team is constantly frustrated with the tech team because they just don't know how to give them what they want. And they're online reading and reaching out and doing their homework on their own, trying to learn, but there's no replacement for actually having a guy in the room who can teach you and show you how to solve problems like feedback, or like, getting monitors correct. Identifying the monitor mixes and making sure that when the lead singer asks for more of his vocal, you're turning it up in his mix and not the drummer's mix. There's always a whole bunch of that kind of stuff going on. And that's something that takes time. That's something that takes time to learn, and you need to be pouring money into your tech team so they know this kind of stuff. Bringing people like me in who can sit down and make sense of all that. And I'm 100% of the time when I would have this conversation, in that feeling like a referee, in that workshop, 2-hour block that I always put in between the tech team and the praise and worship team, it's like silence just comes over the praise and worship team. Like the light comes on and they're like, you know what, you're absolutely right. We're all on the same team here, guys. We're all trying to further the gospel. We're all trying to do what's best for for the ministry. And if we're not all acting like we're on the same team, well, then you just kind of shoot yourself in the foot. I have walked away from huge opportunities and a whole lot of money because there were environments where me and my team, I may have been paid and had a volunteer team, we weren't being supported correctly. And the church was not giving us the tools and the resources we need to be successful and helping the praise team be the best they can be. Because the other side of that conversation is the tech team needs to understand that these guys that have spent decades honing their craft as musicians and as a band are now handing you their talent and their gifts to reinforce and to kind of put the icing on the cake of what they're trying to accomplish, in the worship service. The tech team is every bit as important as the worship team when it comes to creating a comfortable environment for people to be able to enter in and worship. Otherwise it just feels like entertainment, or it feels like it's not so good, and if you have a praise team with a bunch of mediocre musicians, what you definitely need more than anything else in your ministry is a really good sound guy. Because a really good sound guy can take a mediocre praise team and make them sound great. If you give him the right equipment, you give him the right resources that he needs to do what he needs to do. And that is the hardest thing to get through to people because, and I get it, I'm a licensed minister technically. I have no desire to be a church pastor. I actually got my ministry license just to be able to visit people in the hospital and to go into prisons. And, I have 10 years as a recovery counselor and been inside of recovery programs for, the last 10 years, and wanted to have the ability to be able to go see people who have overdosed or people who have gotten locked up, for drug charges and stuff like that. Because that's kind of where my heart's at. I really love that sort of stuff. So I do understand what it is to be in that authoritative position, and I know that your focus is on trying to build, your children's department. That's always super huge. You're trying to pour money into that and to resource your children's minister and your youth minister, and that sort of thing, your teen group, and you're trying to get that stuff all underneath of you. Those are the legs that your ministry is going to stand on moving forward. Again, I'm talking to small, to like kind of mobile churches or whatever who are trying to get established. So the tech stuff doesn't really rank real high in your mind as a pastor, and that's a mistake. It really is. It's a mistake. Because look at it from this perspective. If you can't get butts in seats on Sunday morning and keep people's attention for the 90 minutes you have them, or however long it is that you have them, you're not going to get the children. You're not going to get the teens. You're not going to get all the other things in your ministry that you need. So you've got to establish an organized and well executed Sunday morning service. And that comes from having a great praise and worship leader and a good band and an incredible tech team, And in today's age where we're live streaming a bunch of this stuff, you really need to communicate that energy and that spirituality of your service to the internet. And that's hard, and that's not cheap to do. That takes money to do that. But if you do those things, I promise you your ministry will grow by leaps and bounds. I've seen it. I've been in and out of church production for close to 30 years, 27 years, something like that. Worked exclusively in that for 15 years. But I still do, some install stuff. I don't do a lot. I do 2 or 3 installs a year these days. And I'm to a point where, and this is where we're going to kind of transition. So let's just transition. So in transitioning, this is where things get frustrating, because I'm to a point in my career where I just don't have the time or the patience to play church games anymore. And I know that sounds harsh, but there's a business perspective involved here. I don't have the time to go and drive to your church, wherever it is, and spend 2 or 3 hours telling you what you need to do, maybe troubleshooting and fixing some issues on site while I'm there for free. Like, I can't do that anymore. I'm way too busy, because to do that means I'm taking away time from other aspects of CLP audio that makes me money, because I got bills to pay and all that kind of stuff too. And the Bible says a workman's worthy of his reward. If you don't see that in my services, I'm 100% okay with that. I'm 100% okay if you don't see the skill set that I bring to the table. I'm not stressing out over that at all. I refuse. I got way too much other stuff to do to sit and goof around with some guys that are going to waste my time. I'm going to give you a number, whatever it is going to be more than what you thought it was going to cost to fix your problems. So then they have sticker shock, and then I get nothing out of it. Or they're trying to beat me up on my price, and then I end up making no money. I cannot count the times that I have went out and done installs and lost money, because I was trying to be a nice guy. There was a point in my life where there was a ministry aspect of this for me. That is gone now. That is not part of I don't feel drawn to do AV ministry, that way. If you want me and you want me to help you and help your church, train your people, install stuff, do whatever, that's all fine and good. Here's a quote. Here's what it's going to cost you. I typically make about $100 an hour doing whatever I do, wherever I do it. So if I'm going to come out, I charge a consulting fee now. It usually costs you anywhere between $250 and $500 for me to come out and just have a conversation with you about what it is you need to do, or to sit down and plan out an itinerary of how you can grow into where you want to be financially and technically. And I'm going to make you spend more money than you want to, but you're going to save more money in the long run, because I over-engineer everything that I do, and it gives you some future proofing and how you're doing stuff. So if you spend 35% more now than you want to, you'll save 100% 5 years from now, because you won't have outgrown your system in 5 years, Now, if your church is growing and you need to move into a new building or a new, build a new room, worship room on your facility, hey, that's good news, man. That's great. The stuff we put in place in the first room can be passed right down to the teen ministry, and those guys can rock it out. Or we can uninstall stuff there and move it into the next room and have some gear, so you don't have to start fresh. I always recommend starting fresh, but if you're really that tight, we can move gear around. But it's going to cost you money to pay me to come in and uninstall the equipment and then reinstall it over here. You're really not saving a whole ton of money that way, because my time is worth something too, And, the reality of this is not everyone sees the genius of your gifts and talents. And it took me a long time to understand that. Let me say that again, because I think that needs to be, repeated. Not everyone is going to see the genius of the gifts and talents that you bring to the table. For me, I'm a pretty good drummer, so I've done that in church as well. And I'm a great tech guy. If you don't see that, I'm not mad. It used to really jack me up, but I'm just to a point in my life where I don't care anymore about that. The Bible says, be careful in nothing, through prayer and supplication we make our needs known to God. I'm not going to stress out over the fact that you're too blind by either your budget issues or by some cancerous person that's on your staff undermining everything that I'm trying to, tell you need to do. I don't have time for any of that stuff. If you guys want to play those games without me, because that's where I am. And I know that's hard. And I know that's hard to hear, especially if you're, a church pastor and you're listening to this and it's like, well, JR, that sounds kind of tough. Well, okay, yeah, but like I said just a minute ago, I don't feel a ministry aspect of this anymore. I feel a ministry aspect to working in recovery. That's where I volunteer boatloads of my time. I run a podcast, a Truth Labyrinth podcast, that I do for free, finance myself. That's where I feel my ministry lays, not in tech, So if you're going to have me help you with tech, it's going to cost you money. And if you don't see the value in what I bring to the table, that's okay, because I'm going to walk away and go do business with 100 other people that do see the value in what I bring to the table. I don't have time to stand there and convince you of this. And I have found myself countless times standing there talking about, look, here's a proven track record that I have. I know what I'm talking about here, and this is what we need to do. Just to have somebody rolling their eyes at me across the room because they think I'm trying to puff myself up to be somebody I'm not. I have no ego on any of this at all. None. I really don't care. If you don't like what I do, I'm okay with that. If you don't like me personally, I'm okay with that. You're not jacking my groove. I'm an actor in this world, not a reactor. I'm not going to react to all the junk that you're bringing to the table. And let's be honest, man, there's a whole lot of churches that are very toxic when it comes to staff. And they don't even see it. They're completely blind to it. And then when someone like me comes along, and I'm very, honest and genuine about what I see and what needs to be done, because, being honest and real is what gets you from point A to point B the fastest with the least amount of energy. When you have somebody on the team who maybe there's someone who's been part of your staff for a long time and you trust them, they've built a rapport with you, and then you bring somebody like me in who's brand new, I may not have earned the right to have your confidence that this other guy does, but that other guy could easily be the cancer that is keeping your ministry from growing the way it should be growing. And I cannot count the times that I've seen that exact scenario play out, where you got some paid staff guy who is doing nothing but trying to keep his life comfortable. He doesn't like change, and he just really wants, the new tech guy to be his lackey, his stagehand, to just kind of wait on him and do all the things that he wants to do. Most of those guys have massive control issues, and nothing will drive me away from even a paid church tech experience quicker than that scenario playing out. I just don't have it in me anymore, guys. I just don't. I've been in this business way too long. I've established myself in this business. If you don't see that, again, that's okay. That's okay. You don't have to see it. You can hire somebody else. I'll give you 2 or 3 phone numbers of other guys that can come in here. They're all going to tell you the same thing I've told you, but maybe they'll make you feel warm and fuzzy about it, or put some icing on that cake so it's easier to eat, to where I'm just kind of like, look, here's the issue. This guy is keeping you in the box that you're stuck in. And until you break free of that, you're never going to get where you want to be as a ministry, because you're never going to grow beyond what his comfort level is, because he's got you convinced that this is the best you can do. Or, yeah, there's always room for improvement, but he's never going to be the guy that's going to put boots on the ground to go get it done. He's going to be the guy who's full of vision and has no execution. He's going to be the guy that's always talking, these great and bright ideas, but never has any idea how to put it to the ground. And I would tell you to take a hard look. If you're a pastor listening to this, take a hard look at the people you have in leadership, even if they're volunteers on your tech team. And if you see someone that's like that, if you got other people who are coming to the table and saying, hey, you should do X, Y, and Z, and this guy's immediate response is, no, we don't need to do that. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that line. We don't need to do that. Okay, no, really you do. Because listen to your live feed every week. Look at your services every week. You have no idea how good this could really be, because you're stuck in this guy's vision. And this guy's vision is never going to go beyond what his comfort level is, because he's in cruise control, he's got you in his cruise control, and he's able to control the situation. And as long as he's controlling your tech situation, your tech is never going to grow, and it's never going to get to where you want it to be. There it is. That's the hard truth. IT guys are typically the absolute worst. IT guys are usually arrogant jerks because that's kind of what they are on their job, their day gig, and then they come into a church environment and try to bring that same confidence and arrogance of their IT skills to, audio and video and stuff like that, and it just doesn't transfer. Like, I can teach a monkey how to run the equipment, okay? That's not the problem. Learning how to hear how things should be and understanding the relationship and game structure and all the things that, coverage of the room and, what the band needs, because I'm a musician. Most IT guys aren't. They don't know what the band needs because they've never been on that side of the stage to say, hey, look, man, I can't hear myself. They don't know what that's like. They've never had to perform without monitors. They've never had to perform with a monitor mix that was so horrible that they're just barely, getting through, just really praying in tongues and leaning on the Spirit, trying to get through the service. And nothing pushes away good musicians quicker than that kind of scenario playing out. And then when you try to, to hold the guy responsible for what he's doing, he barks at you or he has, some reason why it ain't his fault and, all that kind of stuff. I've walked into workshop situations where a IT guy had volunteered to save the church some money and made all the mic cables and speaker cables and stuff like that, got the wiring wrong and cost the church thousands upon thousands of dollars in gear because they're burning amps up, burning up. I've seen a guy wire up an XLR wrong one time and had smoke coming out of the front of house console. Guys just don't know what they're doing. They're overconfident. This AV, audio, and sound reinforcement is not information technology, computer stuff. Yes, there are some relations there, especially with the new digital stuff, but you still got to have an ear. You still got to understand how the system works. You still got to be a system tech, and you got to understand a little bit of install stuff too as well. You got to have some electrical engineering background. You got to have some acoustical engineering background. You got to understand, signal flow and, all the stuff that 99.9% of IT guys don't know. And I have seen an IT guy go into a church situation, solve a couple of their problems because they're kind of obvious nose on your face kind of stuff, and gain the trust of church leadership, and then drag that church into a pit that they never grow out of. I got installer buddies of mine who have called me in tears, literally in tears, because they have, tried to do the right thing for their own personal church and went and volunteered tons and tons of time, and some IT guy, tech director, just poops all over their stuff. Some musicians that end up being ahead of tech can be like that too. They understand the musical side of it. They have some ear, but then they don't understand the system tech side. Yeah, they know how to plug, cables in and make noise come out of speakers. That doesn't make them a sound guy. That doesn't make them an audio engineer, And sometimes those guys, a lot of times, those guys, the musicians that become tech directors, they're the guys that will find that comfortable box and just hold the church in that box for decades. And then the church wastes decades of their ministry trying to grow out of that and can never really get over the hump. And, to get out of that funk means ruffling a lot of feathers. It's the only way. And I have sat across the table at dinner from pastors and have sat in board of directors meetings and stuff like that and sat there and told them the cold, hard truth that I'm telling you guys right now. And they all just kind of sat there in silence looking at each other. Or they just dismiss me like I don't know what I'm talking about, and no, our guy really isn't like that. And I'm standing there saying, no, here's the cancer that's keeping your tech group from growing. He might be your buddy, he might be your brother-in-law, he might even be family. But if you want to grow out of this hole that you're stuck in, or this funk that you're stuck in, you're going to have to, number one, spend some money, and number two, probably set that guy down and have a hard conversation with him. You may need to remove him from the equation altogether. I've seen situations where the tech guys have asked for a bunch of stuff, and when they didn't get their way, just got mad and left. I've had to follow some guys like that into a ministry that was really hurt and wounded from a toxic tech guy, from a guy who put a smile on his face and everything was fine and good as long as the church was doing what he wanted them to do. But then the second they wanted to step outside, his vision and make him uncomfortable, he'd either get mad and quit or he's going to throw a big temper tantrum. Well, do you want to grow or do you want to stay in the funk that you're in? The choice is yours. I don't have a dog in the fight because I'm a hired gun, I have the ability to come in and look in with a non-biased view and say, this is what's going on with your church. If you don't want to do what I say, no problem. That's why I charge for those meetings. I'm going to get paid. I'm going to go home and I'm going to sleep like a baby that night. You guys are the ones that's going to be stuck with the issues. It's not going to fix itself. I can promise you that. It's not going to get better on its own. You got to be brave enough to, in love, I'm not saying be a jerk, but in love, say, look, we appreciate everything you've done for the church, but we're wanting to go into a different direction now, and we're going to bring this outside entity in, and we're going to, try to push this to the next level. Churches that get brave and courageous and do that are churches that break that cycle and grow into what they want to be. It's not always about, spending money and buying gear and all this kind of stuff, because here's the other side of this. Let's break for that, the other side of this. So the other side of this is you get some guys who have vision out the rear end, want to execute a plan, but they want you to finance their little tech hobby. And I have seen churches waste hundreds of thousands of dollars because of that. Guys that want to have the greatest, latest, best everything because that's what's popular on the internet. That's what's popular on the, church production, Facebook pages. They want the latest, greatest consoles, the latest, greatest microphones, wireless systems, and all that stuff is crazy expensive. I have never been that guy. I've never been someone who wanted to spend the church's money on stuff they didn't need. And, it's hard to make people understand that when you're asking for tens of thousands of dollars because they probably need a complete overhaul. I have a church in my family of install, friends right now that needs a complete, utter install. And, when you look at them and tell them they need to spend $50,000 or $60,000, they're like, I don't know. We just don't have the money for that. But then you sit and you watch that same church turn around and hire 2 or 3 more pastors on staff. And that's like, I have only been in, I'll say 10% of the time when I've had those conversations with churches and they tell me they don't have the money for it. 90% of the time they just didn't have the money for that. The other 10% of the time they legitimately didn't have the money. I seen a church one time, and we can get into horror stories later in the video, but I'll just give you this one. I seen a church one time, who didn't have money for tech, but then spent $27,000 to paint a mural on the side of the church. Where are your priorities at? Because obviously your priorities were in the artistic expression on the side of the church than it was on the artistic expression that happens on Sunday mornings with your worship team. I think that's very rude to the countless volunteers that give their time to either be on the worship team, be on tech, or whatever. I think it's very rude. I think it's a slap in the face to those people who have spent, in some cases, decades of their life volunteering their time to support your ministry. That's tough. That's tough. So that's kind of the small to medium-sized church thing. In the bigger churches, the large churches, even up into the mega churches, usually the mega churches are mega churches because they've spent the money to be mega churches. I'm uncomfortable with a lot of the business side of the mega church, thing, but that's just my own hang-ups. Pray for me because I'm trying to work through some of that. But the people who have seen the value in putting a solid, well-trained tech team in place has always 100% of the time been churches that have grown and have been churches that have brought people to the table, man. Lives have been changed. Every other aspect of their ministry grew. I was part of one church many years ago that was just a little country church that had maybe 80 or 100 people in it. And they started investing in their praise team. They started investing in their tech team. And in 2 years, they had grown to like 800,000 people a week, doing multiple services, things like that. Out of just doing that one thing, out of just investing in their praise team and their tech team, which is all considered one thing inside of church production. It's considered the arts of, church production. But yeah. So, you get into some of the bigger churches, and then that's when you kind of run into a lot of guys. Like, say you're a church that has money, and you've dumped a bunch of money into your tech team, and it's just not getting it done. I would venture to say you got the wrong people in your tech team. Because I've seen that too. I've seen okay, we got a church that is willing to spend money on tech, and they just got the wrong people in place. They got underqualified people. Maybe they were people who came up with the church, grew with the church. Maybe they've been there for 20 years. Have invested tons of their own time into it. Now they're paid staff, so on and so forth. A lot of times they're family, and that kind of thing. But they're just not getting, you've given them all the resources they need, they're just not getting it done. That's where you need to bring somebody like me in who's a professional and can straighten that stuff out and start delivering the results that you want to deliver. But you got to understand, when you bring a guy like me in, I'm going to analyze everything that you're doing as far as the arts part of your ministry. And I'm going to tell you things that you may need to change that may make you uncomfortable, but things you need to change that's going to get you from point A to point B. Look, I'm not an expert in church growth, but I have been doing this long enough and seen this play out before me long enough to know pretty much what works and what doesn't work. It's the same way in the secular music business. I can tell you how to make your cover band successful because I've been working in that business most of my life. I've run my own, regional cover band, and that sort of thing. I know what it takes to get from point A to point B. Again, if you don't see me as that, that's okay. I'm going to get paid. I'm going to go home and I'm going to sleep like a baby. You're the one that's going to be stuck holding the bag. You're going to be the one stuck holding the bag. You're going to be the one looking at the numbers, and wondering why your ministry's not growing. Like, man, JR, we've really spent so much money doing this, that, and the other with our ministry, and it's just not getting where we want to go. Well, if you keep trying to do the same thing over and over and expect a different result, that's insanity. We all know that. You probably teach that from the pulpit. So why are you doing this same thing over and over and expecting a different result? Maybe you need to get knocked out of your comfort zone. Maybe you need to do something different. And I have seen churches that refuse to change, and because of that, guess what? Nothing ever changed in their ministry. They never grew. Never seen new people come in and get saved and get into discipleship programs and bring more people in. If your church isn't growing, then something's wrong. That's just a ministry concept. If your church isn't growing, then you're just stagnant. You're no different than the local country club. You have a social club. If it's the same people in your church week after week after week, you got a social club. Your ministry's not growing. You should constantly be hearing stories of how people's lives are changed because of the gospel of Jesus Christ. If that's not the case in your church, you're stagnant. You really need to get real with God, and you really need to get real with your staff, and you need to get real with where you're spending your money. I always look at it like these are like little old ladies and single moms that are tithing to the church and giving their money to the church. And, that money did not come easy to them people. They had to work. Sometimes, like some of them single moms, man, are working 2 or 3 jobs and still paying their tithes. So as a tech guy, when I go to spend money, man, I think about that stuff. I'm like, I'm not going to put more gear in your church than what you need. Yeah, I may over-engineer a little bit to try to future-proof you because I'm trying to save you money in the long run. But I'm not the guy who's looking to get you to finance my little tech dreams or whatever. I own a production company. My toys are way better than your toys, okay? I can promise you that. I'm not that guy. I don't have that mentality. And a lot of young guys do. I see a lot of young guys come out of sound school, get involved in a church, get a $20,000 a year part-time salary from the church, and then got the church spending hundreds of thousands of dollars because they're trying to turn it into, a stadium show or something like that. And the church may not be there. Hey, look, if you get to the place where you're doing stadium shows, that's one thing, okay? But if you're still a mobile church, or you just got into your first church building, or you're like, 80% of churches in America that are under 500 people on Sunday morning in attendance, then, you got to put somebody in place who really understands how to navigate all that financial stuff and the technical stuff. And I'm going to tell you right out of the gate, it's going to sting financially. But once we get everything in place and you see how good it can really be, and your or your praise and worship team starts getting excited about coming to church and working and, giving their time to the Lord, it will make all the difference in the world. It will. So let's move on to some horror stories. I don't even know where to start with this, because I could sit here for hours and tell you horror stories about, church production. I will tongue-in-cheek say regularly that church production is kind of the bane of my existence, because I have spent so much time trying to get churches to do the right thing that I am to a point in my life now where I don't care. If you want to keep being a jacked up mess, I'm okay with that. Either don't bother me because I don't have time to play games, or bring some money to the table to make it worth my time, because I don't have a ministry aspect of this. I've talked about that already. But yeah, I've been in situations where I remember one of the first installs I ever did, I came off a road in '94. I got radically, saved and recommitted my life to the Lord, because I grew up in church and that sort of thing. And I was in a full gospel church, and the church just grew. I mean, we were growing like crazy. I was doing everything as a volunteer, wasn't making a nickel or a dime on anything. And these guys were building a $500,000 new sanctuary. And they gave me about a $15,000 budget to do a full-on sound and light install. Now, if you're a tech guy listening to this, you're probably laughing right now, because even in the mid-90s, that wasn't a lot of money, to try and do an install. Those guys really, even in that time, could have easily spent, $25,000, $30,000 just to do a basic fundamental, foundational, install for that room. And that wasn't even on the table. So I was, in my mid-20s and full of piss and vinegar at the time, and just crazy in love with Jesus and just wanting to do what was right. And volunteered just hundreds of hours of my time to try and get that install done. I remember doing days and days of soldering, made a whole bunch of cables, trying to save the church money. I was on the team, man. I was on the same page as everybody else on the board of directors and stuff like that, and just trying to get it done. And the second we fired the system up, it was inadequate for the room. I knew it when I was putting it together. I tried to tell them that. They wouldn't listen. So then, after having spent probably 6 months of my life in and out of this place trying to get this stuff together, and my kids were young then, taking time away from my family and everything else, the only response I got from that install was how displeased the pastor and everybody was with the install. And I'm over here saying, well, you guys gave me $15,000 to do a, $30,000, $40,000 install. So this is what you get. You didn't want to spend the correct money to do this right. So you get what you pay for. And that really stuck in my craw for a long time. It ended up being the foundation of why I even left the church like a year later. I couldn't take it anymore. And I learned some valuable lessons through that. I had a pastor buddy of mine come to me probably a couple years after this, and he had gotten an install quote from a big city, AV company, and it was a lot of money, And he came to me knowing that I do this sort of thing. My dad actually went to his church, and we were all friends. And he came to me literally begging me to try and help him with this. Okay, no problem. So I actually made a bunch of phone calls, called in a bunch of favors, put together a quote, went before their board of directors, did a full-on presentation for what we needed to do, why we needed to do it, put an itemized list of gear, full transparency on everything, which AV guys never do that. They rarely ever give you that. Or if they do, it's their inflated prices and stuff like that. I really still felt like there was a ministry aspect of it for me at that time of my life. And I was trying to help out a friend, I had a lot of hours and a lot of cashing in favors wrapped up in that quote. And they ended up handing my quote and my itemized list of gear to some DJ guy that was a volunteer at their church and had him do the install. I didn't make a dime on that whole situation, nothing. And they were telling me the whole time that they were going to have me do this. And even doing the install, I wasn't making big money. I was going to make enough money to cover my time, and that was about it. When looking back on it now, if I was to bid that same job now, my quote would have been the same as the company, from the city that they had gotten a quote from. That left a really, really bad taste in my mouth. Had a music pastor buddy of mine call me to come to his Episcopal church. This was down in Northern Virginia. This has only been 5-6 years ago. Same scenario. They had a local AV company giving them a quote to what it was going to cost to overhaul their system, and their system was extremely technical. The way they had things set up, it was require a lot of man hours and a lot of labor to make this thing right. And I think my quote was about half of what the other guy's quote was, because I don't have near the overhead that the big company has and stuff like that, and really just trying to be decent with them. And I was going to make money on the gig. There was no doubt about it. I don't make any bones about this. I don't do this as a hobby. I do this because I'm trying to make a living. So I have to make money on it. And they ran me. Now, they did pay me for a consultation the first time. I did make a second trip down there to meet with them a second time, because they were kind of waving the carrot out in front of me. They were going to get me to do this install. And then after probably 6 weeks of just emails and text messages and phone calls and all that kind of stuff, and really just eating up a whole boatload of my time, they ended up going with the AV company because they didn't believe that I could do the install correctly at that price. So my bid was too low. Have you even heard of such a thing? My bid was too low? And there you have it, a whole bunch of craziness about church production. I actually had another 15-minute segment there that followed this last segment that after reviewing it, I didn't feel comfortable sharing some of the things that I had shared in that. I really, as you can tell with some of the stuff that I'm saying here, I'm sort of jaded, with church production, because I've kind of been pooped on a bunch of times and stuff like that. And in fear of bringing too much negative light to the idea of church, because church does not need any help with that, I just deleted that last segment and then thought I'd inject this just to kind of close out the video. I think you guys get the point, that it can be a challenging environment, and it's really hard when you got people in place that have their own agendas and have their own things. And you know what? We deal with that in every scenario. We deal with that at the workplace. We deal with it at the gym. Anytime you put people together in any kind of organization, you're going to have drama to some degree or another. But it's a different thing when you're manipulating people and you're disrespecting people, and there's a level of toxicity that is not healthy for your tech team or people who are genuinely just trying to help you. But I didn't want to get too deep down that rabbit hole, and that's where that last segment kind of went. It kind of went down that rabbit hole, and I think I'm just going to leave things where they are. Be sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell notification so you'll know when I'm posting new videos. I'm not going to blow you up. I do about a video a week or something like that because I'm working for a living and, you know, have a production company to run here. And I meant to say earlier in the video that, you know, CLP and CLP Audio stands for Christ-Like Productions. You know, this company originally started out as a exclusive church production, you know, focused company. And I operated under that Christ-Like Productions brand for many, many years. It wasn't until I finally left the church and went back into the secular market that I created CLP Audio. So, yeah. So that's kind of a little bit more of the history there. Go over to TikTok. Check out TikTok. Grumpy Sound Guy. I'm getting ready to rant, like totally rant on some stage plot, you know, stuff over there today. And CLP Swag Store. You can get your Grumpy Sound Guy T-shirts, CLP Audio swag, you know, the whole 9 yards. Please support that. That kind of helps finance some of my time and effort that I have into all this crazy stuff, because it's very hard for me to set aside, you know, a couple hours to record this, edit it, do all the posts, and, you know, then uploading stuff to YouTube takes forever anymore. So yeah, go hit that up, clpaudio.com. If you need, if you'd like me to come out and take a look at your church, you know, situation and want to do a consultation meeting or something, I'm always open to that. Those things are easier to do in late fall and winter than what they are in the summertime. But by all means, please hit me up. I'm easy to find. I'm all over Facebook. You know, go like the CLP Audio Facebook page and all that jazz. You can send me messages on there. So I love y'all. Be good to each other, okay? See you next time.